Hey y'all. You don't like what? Oh, hey y'all. Today's objective is solving equations with squares and square roots. So in Unit 1 we did squares and square roots, so we're coming back to that in equations. Squares and square roots are inverse operations. So if you want to undo a square, use the square root. And if you want to undo a square root, you have to use the square. Here's an important part. Every square root has two answers. Every square root is going to have two possible answers. That's because 6 squared, 6 times 6 is 36, and negative 6 squared is also 36 because negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. Therefore, if you take the square root of 36, your answer is 6 and negative 6. So we're going to practice this concept today. All right, example 1. X squared equals 16. So since I have a square, I need to undo it with a square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, just like that. These cancel, so see how I drew that line? Those are going to undo each other. So I'm left with x equals the square root of 16. Well, we know the square root of 16 is 4, but it's also negative 4. Because remember, the square root of everything has two answers. Number 2. X squared plus 4 equals 13. If you draw your line, we need to minus 4 from both sides first. And now I have x squared equals 9. So I subtracted 4 from both sides. Now I'm going to take the square root, and x equals 3 or negative 3 because the square root of 9 is 3. Number 3, I draw my line. I'm going to add 6 to both sides. And I bring over my 2x squared equals 72. Before I can do anything, I can't get to my x squared. I need to divide by 2. 72 divided by 2 is 36. Oops, this is x squared. Oops, sorry. Now I can take the square root, and x is going to equal 6 or negative 6. All right, so number 4, when you put it all together, when you draw your line, we're going to minus 8 from each side. So 155 minus 8. So I'm left with 3x squared equals 147. Let me check. 155 minus 8. Then I need to divide both sides by 3. And that divided by 3 is 49. So I know that x squared is going to equal 49. I take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to 7 or negative 7. So you have two answers when you take the square root. All right, so number 5, I'm going to add 12 to both sides. And now this time I have a negative 4x. It's going to equal negative 576. I have to divide both sides by negative 4. So negative 556 divided by negative 4 is 144. Whenever you're left with an x squared, we don't want an x squared, we want an x. So I have to take the square root, those cancel, and x equals 12 or negative 12. All right. Number 6 looks a little different because of this fraction here, but we do the same thing. We're going to take the square root, and we've practiced, when you have a fraction, you take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So the square root of square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 16 is 4. But remember, it could also be a negative 5 over 4. Anytime you take the square root, you're going to come out with two answers. Now 7 and 8 are a little different. I hope you can understand. See, this has an x plus 1 squared. This is just the x squared. This has an x plus 1 squared. So we have to take the square root first. We can't get to this 1 until we get rid of the square. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And we get x plus 1 is equal to a positive 4 or a negative 4. Alright, so this is where it can kind of get a little tricky, because the square root of 16 is either a positive 4 or a negative 4. Then we have to do minus 1. So we have to do it from both numbers. So that means we do 4 minus 1, which is 3. 4 minus 1 is 3, and we do negative 4 minus 1, so we can type in your calculator, negative 4 minus 1, which is negative 5. So my answers could be 3 or it could be negative 5. Let me show you another one here. Notice it's inside parentheses. If it's inside the parentheses, we have to get rid of the square first. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And then we get x minus 7 equals 9 and negative 9, because the square root of 81 is 9 or negative 9. Then we're going to add 7. When you add 7, you have to add it to both of our options. So 9 plus 7 is 16. Negative 9 plus 7 is negative 2. So those are our two options. X is equal to 16 or it's equal to negative 2. So whenever you take the square root, you're going to have two answers. Alright, so here on number 9, we've got a lot of stuff going on. First, I have x plus 4 in parentheses, but I can't take the square root until I get rid of this minus 3. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and I get x plus 4 squared equals 9. Now, I can take the square root of both sides, and I'm left with x plus 4 equals 3 or negative 3. I need to undo plus 4, so I'm going to do minus 4 on both sides. 3 minus 4 is negative 1. Negative 3 minus 4 is negative 7. So those are your two options. Those are your two answers. Let's get number 10. Minus 4 on both sides equals 121, because 125 minus 4 is 121. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of 121 is 11 or negative 11. And these cancel, so I'm left with 2x plus 5. Whenever you take the square root of something in parentheses, it cancels, so just that parentheses is left, 2x minus 5, x plus 4. I need to subtract 5 from everything. Alright, so this one has an extra step, 2x. So 11 minus 5 is 6. Negative 11 minus 5 is negative 16. Then we have to divide by 2. And so x could equal 3 or negative 8. Woo! That was a long one. A very long problem. So lots of stuff going on. Alright, so these are solve the equations when you already have the square root. So we practice. The opposite of a square root is to square a number. So if I have x squared, if I have the square root of x and I want to get x by itself, I'm going to square each side. So notice the square root and a square are going to cancel out, and I'm left with x. And 10 squared is 100. Right here, I'm going to square each side. 4 squared is 16, and these are going to cancel, so I'm left with x plus 1. Whenever you square it, you bring that, whatever's under the radical, you bring down. I minus 1 on both sides, so x equals 15. Okay? Now number 3, both things are under the radical, so I'm going to square both sides. I'm left with x minus 2 equals 9, because 3 squared is 9. I add 2 to both sides, and x equals 11. Alright, so I'm running out of my time, so what I want you to do is right here, we're going to do number 4, 5, and 6 in class, and then we're going to practice this more in class.